build my gallows and build them high. Makes a long time climbing before I die. I want the chance to spit in his eye. Oh, well, they gave me ball, but I can see between to a dusty yard and a long gone green. They call that freedom, if you know what I mean. And I dry my sorrows, but the whiskey's gone. I'm sober.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Longbangers. This is episode 157, I think. I'm joined tonight. I had to guess at that one. Normally I checked beforehand and I didn't. Right, so we're going to go with 157. I got Colin. Colin, how are you doing?
Good. Tired. Looking forward to getting this finished so I can go to my bed.
We were out yesterday, Colin. We intended to have like a sort of an afternoon session and early finish, but it didn't quite pan out that way. Well, not for you anyway.
Not early enough, no.
Nah. And John, welcome back. You missed Short Bangers and we failed to speculate on why you missed it, but you were ill. So I'm guessing it was knob rot and you've had the relevant ointment now and you're back to your fighting fitness. Is that about right?
I got an emergency appointment with the GP on the Wednesday night.
Good stuff.
Got the knob rot sorted out. It's episode 158, by the way.
158? Oh, I was close. Anyway. And our special guest tonight is journalist and podcaster Graham Spiers. Graham, how are you doing?
I'm fine, guys. I'm feeling intimidated being invaded by a gang of Hibbies here, but I'm fine. I'm fine.
Nothing to be intimidated by at all. So, Graham, thanks for taking some of your Sunday night to talk to us. We will be talking about all things Hibs coming up, but you've have your own podcast as well. Could you tell us a wee bit about your own podcast and any guests on it that kind of might be of interest to a Hibs supporting audience?
Yes, right. Well, my podcast is called Press Box, hosted by me, Graham Spiers. I started it kind of 2 years ago because I had cut down my newspaper writing and I had some kind of free time on my hands, mainly due to family commitments. And a pal of mine had been banging on at me for years to do a podcast, a Scottish football podcast. And he felt I was in a position to do it because of maybe a certain media profile or a certain social media tracking or whatever the reasons were. So, I've been doing my podcast for about maybe 18, 20 months. And it's ostensibly a Scottish football podcast with interviews and debates with players and managers and journalists. So it may be similar to this. It's a round table. If it's a debate pod, it'll be a round table chat about issues of the day. If it's a one-to-one interview, and I've done, well, off the top of my head, who have I done it? At Hibs, Lewis Stevenson, Jack Ross when he was in situ, Leanne Dempster came on, I think, I can't remember. Martin O'Neill, all the Jim Goodwin, most of the managers have come on. Most of the Scottish managers have come on. So that's what it is. It's a Scottish football podcast debate / interviews. And I do it on I do 2 a week, yeah. And the problem I've got is there was this debate about whether you do a podcast that's free or whether you do subscription. And that there was this issue. So mine is subscription, but I try to make it cheap as chips. So it's $1.99 a month, and I enjoy doing it. Aye.
And $1.99 a month is good value for it. You know, when you look at the guest list roster that you had there, $1.99. We charge £3 for ours, and we don't cast any aspersions about the difference in quality or anything like that. With paying a bit more. I'm joking. We give ours away as well, Graham.
Right. Right.
I think we're
you pay for it and you give it away.
Yeah,
you pay for it and you give it away.
We do a mix of both. So this episode will go out to free to air to anybody who wants to listen to it, and then right on the back of this, once you've gone back to kind of carry on your Sunday evening, John and Colin and myself will chat a bit more about Hibs, and that'll go out as a subscriber only issue. So we'll have a wee bit extra content for anybody that really likes it and wants to pay a bit more. That's okay. How we kind of work it, and the rest we're quite happy to kind of give out and do for nothing.
I mean, I don't want to drone on about this too much because I know it's a side issue, but the problem I had, Matty, was that so some people said to me, "Oh, Graham, you've made a terrible mistake charging a fee, making it subscription. It should be free." And then other people said, "Oh, you've gone in far too cheap. You've made you should have gone in at 2.99 or 3.99. I didn't know which way to turn. So, but anyway, it's going quite well.
Yeah, excellent. I'm glad to hear it. I think it's one of these things you put the work in, and there is a value to the work that you do. So you're every right to kind of ask for payment for it. And I suppose there's different models work for different folks. Just before we jump into the podcast properly, I suppose we should mark the comment on the passing of Andy Gorham this week as well. So Andy played, over 150 times for Hibs. Was probably the best goalkeeper that most of us have seen at Hibs in our lifetime. So
And scored.
And
He also
scored.
scored for us.
He also scored against Morton, didn't he? It was a 3-0 win. So our thoughts go to Andy's friends and family, and we hope he rest in peace, etc. So moving on to that, Graham, we're interested. The reason we got you on is you have this view of Scottish football, and you're kind of perfectly placed to talk probably a bit more objectively than we can about Hibs. So I'd be interested to get your views on the season Hibs had last season, because we've talked about it at length on the podcast and found it to be quite a grim season. So from the outside looking in, what did you make of Hibs season?
Gosh, well, it was very eventful, wasn't it? I mulled over the Jack Ross sacking and eventually decided that I thought it was pretty wrong, pretty mistaken. But the context of it was I've learned in my career in journalism to really respect what a lot of the diehard fans want, because they see their team week in, week out. Unlike journalists like me who drift in and out, so-called experts, which very often we're not in many situations. We drift in and out and pontificate from on high. I've kind of learned as the years have passed to respect the views of diehard fans, and there were a whole pile of Hibs fans that wanted rid of Jack Ross. What wasn't there? That was just the blunt fact of it. So I had to factor that in. There was that terrible night when you lost at Livy, was it? And was it 9 losses? I can't remember. But they were on a terrible run. The team were on a terrible run, and so many fans thought the play was boring, and they wanted Jack Ross out. And the context for me was, but look what he's achieved in the 2 years. Look at the league finishes. Look at the cup finals. Surely that should have given him more time. So I was caught between these two stools, and I eventually decided that I thought his sacking was pretty brutal, to be honest. But there's this old the old American phrase that the customer's always right, the paying public are always right, the clientele are always right. And it seemed to me there was a voluble mob of you from all across the Hibs board that wanted rid of Jack Ross. So, a certain democracy prevails then. So we can talk about that maybe a bit more in depth. And then comes Sean Maloney. And here was the thing for me about Sean Maloney. I've known Sean for 20 years off, and I don't know him well at all, but I've sat down in a media room with him. I've chatted to him. I remember when he first appeared as an 18-year-old when I interviewed him with 3 other journalists. Would that be back in the early 2000? Yeah, 2000, 2001. And I've always liked Sean, but I found him very unconvincing as Hibs manager, and I found the Hibs football unconvincing under Sean Maloney. Endless inconsequential possession, frequent overstating of how important the possession had been when it looked to me it hadn't been very important at all. I found all of that frustrating. When Sean came in, just by sheer fluke, I think I covered 4 Hibs games out of 6 between a period of February, March, or March, April. And I kept coming back to this phrase. This is over-egged football. This is souped up football. This football is going nowhere. Football has to, the end of football has to be menace, danger, havoc. There was none of that under. So I hated myself because I really respect Sean, and I bet you he probably is a very thoughtful coach. But the football, except I was at the Celtic game at home when I think they did well, but I just found it over-egged and not going anywhere. So I found Sean Maloney's football very frustrating. So these were the 2 parts of the Hibs season, and it ended up being a bad time for you guys, didn't it?
It was.
I was going to say, you kind of summed it up there. I think that's exactly what everybody thought about Sean Maloney's football. It was, we were promised. I think we over-egged it. Like when we appointed him, we do have a wee bit of that, though. It was like how attractive and attacking it's going to be, and then it was just what you said it was.
I had this thing, Colin. Sorry for butting in. There were maybe 3 weeks in a row I'd been at Easter Road, and I came back and I'm writing my match reports for the Times, and I'm thinking, how do I say that? I can't keep repeating this. Is there a different way of saying this is over-egged? This is superfluous football. This football's going nowhere. This over-obsession with keeping the ball or having the ball, it drove me to distraction. And I am a Hibs fan, although I have a lot of affection for the club. Half my daft cousins in the Borders are all Hibbies, and I know that Hibs is a great football institution. But so I wasn't even a Hibs fan, but I found it deeply frustrating to watch. So you guys must have been going bonkers watching all this.
But it's interesting.
Sorry, were you tempted, Graham, to just copy and paste any of your match reports about what Hibs had done? Because we were tempted on the podcast because there was a number of games towards the end of the season where it just felt like we could have taken a week off and just re-released the previous week's recording, maybe put Longbangers 152 or whatever over the front of it.
That's exactly it. That was my same experience in print. So I sat down at this same position in my desk in front of my laptop. I saw them play St Johnstone. I saw them play Ross County, which I think they won 2-0. Was it a cup game or something? I can't remember. I can't even remember. I think I saw them play Motherwell. I think I saw you guys Scottish Cup.
No, it was in the league. Jake Hayes scored two cracking goals.
That's right.
The highlight of it.
And he said that was a game. He said he had a pile of mates over from Ireland. Doyle Hayes.
Correct.
I think that was the game. And I think I saw you struggle against Motherwell. That was one I remember, I think. Oh, I just found it really infuriating. And exactly as you were saying, John, it was a kind of 4 weeks in a row. I need to try and think of a different way of saying the same thing, which is that Hibs under Sean Maloney are just infuriating to watch.
I think we actually got to the point where we just decided not to talk about the games. There's probably at least 2 episodes where we were like, there's nothing that we're going to say this week that's different for last week, so we'll skim over it as quickly as we can and then talk about just nonsense after that, because it was dire. It's interesting you mentioned about the support and the views towards Jack Ross, Graham, because we were probably split on the podcast. I think I had reached the point with Jack Ross where I thought it was probably the right time to go, but mostly because of the noise and the ill feeling amongst the support. I think Jack had probably earned enough time for what he had achieved to have been given longer. And I think if he'd been given longer, he would have turned it around. However, there was a really vocal element of the support who wanted him out. But if you look at polls around that time, it was pretty much 50-50. So Hibs.net on the forum there, it was almost split right down the middle with people who wanted to give him more time and people who wanted rid. John, what do you remember of that sort of decision, and what are your thoughts on it now?
Jack Ross, I saw the Livingston game that Graham mentioned. I was there, and it was torture. And I remember speaking about it on Longbangers at the time, saying that there was a couple of performances in particular where I actually thought that the players had stopped playing for Jack Ross, but then obviously you had the comments in the press afterwards where they said, how much they respected him, etc., etc. So I almost felt bad for my opinion on the performances, because I think I'd said that Jamie Murphy, like some of the senior players were, I think I'd said that they were hanging out the younger players to dry. They could have been taking more responsibility. So I was looking at players like Paul McGinn with the sort of half-arsed shirt tug that ended up getting him sent off, and I'd left before Paul Hanlon had been sent off, but I think he was trying to cover 2 positions at that point. That being said, Jack Ross had said previously that he hadn't been backed in the transfer market, so there was I think he was missing a centre-half, he'd said, and he was missing a centre-forward, and that was true leading into that season where he got sacked. And I thought because he'd had that 3rd place finish that he should have had the opportunity of a transfer window to have moved some players on to got some other players in. And we might come on to it, but I thought, or I wonder what Sean Maloney's football would have looked like had he been given the opportunity to have had the clear out that Lee Johnson seems to have had, because he's got a lot of new faces and also had the opportunity to move some players on. I still think that I'm kind of erring on the side of it was too soon to let Jack Ross go, and also that Sean Maloney didn't get a fair crack of the whip. But as Graham said, there was the diehard Hibs fans were saying, "No, get him out, get him to just get rid."
Get rid.
I'm trying not to swear here because
swear away.
With Maloney coming in and going, do you think he was sacked too quickly, or do you think that was about the right decision to make?
I tend to be a bit bleeding hearted about these things. So when John talks here about give Jack Ross more time, I would have said yes. And with Sean Maloney, of course, you have to say it's only fair that a guy going into a tough job should get more than the 3.5 months that Sean got. Yeah. Maybe Sean would have. It seems to me logical and reasonable and compassionate to give a guy a summer transfer window to really do his surgery on the squad and the team and have more time to get his ideas across. The problem Sean had was that the early evidence wasn't very encouraging, was it? I mean, I keep hearing this in football today. They say at all the big clubs, when a manager comes in, you've kind of got to hit the ground running. Now, that doesn't mean coming into a team that's had 7 defeats in a row and suddenly you start winning. But coming in and hitting the ground running surely means signs of progress, signs of optimism, green shoots of recovery. And I just didn't see it with Sean. I just didn't see it. And I know that Sean had to be, I found his post-match analyses a bit frustrating and a bit unconvincing. But then again, Sean would say, well, I've got to be diplomatic about things. I can't come out and slate people. So maybe that's true. Reason tells me that Sean should have got more time than 3 months or whatever he got. But I don't think the evidence there was very good, very convincing. There was no hint of, I didn't see any real progress being made. With Jack Ross, what I would say was that Jack, did he get binned round about November after the cup semi? I know that, maybe 2 weeks before the cup final, I can't quite remember. When I interviewed him in February for the Times, he did say to me, I said to him, did it ever enter your head that you would be sacked before the cup final? He said, no, it didn't. He said it genuinely didn't. I thought that however much the team were struggling and on a run, I thought they would give me at least the cup final, given that I'd got them there. And it was a great semi-final win over Rangers. But so he said to me he was a bit surprised by that. And I don't know what you guys think about this. I mean, I do think Jack Ross is and must be a good football manager, because look what he did in his opening 22 months at Hibs. And look how close he came at Sunderland. And look how well he did at St Mirren, and look how well he did at Alloa. I find it hard to believe that all that evidence stacks up and he's not a good manager. But this brutal thing happens in football, that you can be bowling along and you can have a bad 5 or 6 weeks and you're papped. That's what happens. I mean, Steven Gerrard, you probably hear this from some Rangers fans. Steven Gerrard was all laud and honour when he won the title last year. He was on the brink. They were on a terrible run in, was it February 2020 when COVID first started? They were on a terrible run. And this is an awful way of putting it, but COVID almost saved them. Somebody said to me at the time that there was a poll on that follow Rangers website, which you might think is a madhouse or not, but that's by the by. Somebody said there was a poll at the end of that 5-game run, and there was a majority calling for Gerrard to be binned. But football was suspended, and he stayed in his job, and he came good, and he came really good. So a bad run can do in any good manager, and I think Jack Ross is proof of that.
It's funny because Jack Ross's time at Sunderland, because he came close a couple of times, that almost went against him when it came to his time at Hibs, because he came close a couple of times at Hibs, and folk questioned whether he had it for the big games. And that was one of the sticks that he was hit with by a chunk of the support. Quite a lot, actually. Do you know, it was if we lost the semi-final, we lost the Scottish Cup final to St Johnstone, we probably went into that expecting to win. And if there's an arrogance there when you go in and expect to win a game like that, but do you know how good a chance do you get if you're playing St Johnstone in a cup final? And your Hibs, you know, you kind of be looking at that as one that you can win. So his time at Sunderland almost went against him, as opposed to going for him, but they did have a good record there. It's just interesting that you say that. With Maloney, do you hear, like, in journalistic circles, do you hear sort of murmurings of discontent at football clubs and kind of see the writing on the wall early, or do you get caught by surprise like the rest of us when it eventually happens?
You hear all the murmurings and the rumours. I'm not convinced the rumours that journalists hear or put about are. Sometimes I'm not convinced they're any more credible than rumours and journalists that you guys hear. I mean, you know, in the social media age, everything is out there, isn't it? Corporation bus drivers in Edinburgh sometimes know what's going on at Hibs. But, you know, they're on websites. They bump into people. Journalism used to be, sports journalism used to be the preserve of the insider. We've got the inside knowledge. I don't think that's the case anymore. Sometimes you guys are just as well informed. It used to be we you know, when I think of all the occasions in the inner sanctum I had with some fellow journalists, with Martin O'Neill, Dick Advocat, Paul Le Guen, Jim Jeffries, a whole stack of managers. Yes, it used to be an inner sanctum, but that's all changed now with Zoom and public pressers. So we hear all the rumours. Yeah, I've come to be a bit suspicious of the line, the players put down their tools.
Mm-hmm.
I've come to be a bit suspicious of that because it seems illogical to me. Why would a player not want to win? Why would he not want to get his win bonus? It's become one of the cliches of football. Do you know what, mate? The players have put down their tools. That they're not playing. You know, I'm just a bit suspicious of that. But what is beyond dispute is that this contagion of a lack of confidence after a couple of games, it spreads through players. The psychology of that is undeniable. It just takes a couple of bumpy games, and it's not downing of tools. Sometimes it can be a chronic downing of confidence, and teams losing. How many times, you know, the one thing we can all see, journalists and fans, is you can see players that are scared on the ball, can't you? You can see players that are suddenly ripped of confidence. And I find that much more glaring rather than the downing of tools. Matty, I can't even remember the question you've asked me now, but it was something about, it was rumours of what you hear about players. And yeah that's right. So my answer is somewhere in that ramble.
Good, I'm glad you remembered the question, because I was thinking I can't remember what I asked either. It's standard as well.
It's like people reading my articles. You know, they get halfway through and like, what the hell is this about? I can't even remember the theme of this. You know?
You mentioned Maloney and the press as well, Graham, and sort of the credibility of some of his post-match interviews. Colin and I interviewed Sean for the podcast. We got, like, how long was it, Colin? About 45 minutes sit down with him at Easter Road. And he came across really, really well. And it was like night and day compared to how he came across in the press. But he had this thing, and I think it came out in our interview, Colin, that he felt that some of the press were out to get him. Did you sense that at all, or observe any of that?
I didn't understand that, and I saw he'd made that comment, and I found it a bizarre comment. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, Sean Maloney was quite widely liked in football, quite widely liked in the media. Yes, when he was Celtic, he did this thing, Matty, because when he was at Celtic, because he's intelligent and because he is rightly wary of the press and tabloid headlines, he had the intelligence to be a bit cool, a bit standoffish. Don't give the Rat Pack any material that could be exaggerated or blown up. So one or two journalists were probably a bit frustrated by his kind of intellectual barrier, knowing not to give too much away, maybe being a bit cool. Sean Maloney was never, unlike a lot of footballers I could mention, Sean Maloney was never the kind of guy to go out boozing or having a pint with hacks. It just wasn't his scene. So there was maybe that slight coolness, but in the main, to the best of my knowledge, we all liked the guy, we all respected the guy. Here was a young Scottish coach who'd done with Martinez in Belgium, breaking down borders, breaking down barriers. This is good. This is good for Scottish football. This idea that there was any of us out to get him, well, it baffles me. I know the guys that cover Hibs. I know the guys at the Scotsman. I know the guys at the Record and the Sun. I actually can't remember a single syllable of somebody saying anything to the effect, "I don't like that wee bastard. I hope the wee bastard run out of town." I can't remember anything like that at all. All I can remember is well wishing for Sean Maloney. It was as Paul Le Guen once famously said, "The truth is on the pitch. The truth will be on the pitch." And kind of that's where I felt Sean Maloney fell down.
If we move on for Sean Maloney, we look at sort of Ron Gordon's stewardship. Again, from the outside looking in, Graham, how would you appraise Ron Gordon's ownership at Hibs so far?
Right, well, in terms of Ron Gordon, what I would say is that it's different from Sean, because I'd been around Sean and seen Sean and over many years. So with Ron Gordon, I definitely am looking in from the outside. I've got no personal knowledge of the guy, no relations with the guy, and I think he says it himself. I think he now got it wrong with Jack Ross. Jack probably should have been given longer, and maybe Ron Gordon should have been stronger in that regard. But he kind of, the client is always right. He seemed to kind of slightly give into that principle. I find him a genuine guy. Mm-hmm. I find him a genuine guy, a bit like the Aberdeen owner, who I think wants the best for Aberdeen. Dave Cormack. I find Ron Gordon pretty genuine. I find him authentic. I think he wants the best for Hibs. I might be completely wrong. I don't think he's a shyster. I don't think he's a charlatan at all. Maybe I'm wrong, but he seems genuine and kosher to me. A couple of odd things. The incident with his son was very odd. I never got to the bottom of it, and a lot of people didn't. It was briefly announced that Ian Gordon was head of recruitment. Did this guy have a lot of previous expertise and success in the role? Nobody could find it. I found that a bit odd, but I find him genuine.
Ian Gordon.
Am I wrong? How do the Hibs fans see him?
I think. Well, Colin, you want to answer that one? You could kind of.
Did you see Ron or Ian? Because I think the Ron thing is there's two sides to it. So off the pitch, like all the off the pitch stuff is all positive, and the sponsorship, all the revenues are all up, and everything's great. But of course, we all judge it as what we're seeing on the pitch, and what we're seeing on the pitch isn't be very good. So that's kind of what goes against them. If they can turn the pitch, what's on the pitch round, then all that other stuff will tag on and just make him seem even better. But nobody cares about it until it's better on the pitch. The thing with Ian's a funny one, like, because they did appoint him as the head of recruitment, then they took it off, but he was still in the role. They just didn't have it publicised. Then they came out and said it's a committee thing, the transfer committee, and then they've since come out and said, no, that was the wrong terminology they used. And he is head of recruitment, but it's more a sort of admin coordination role. And it's like, but I mean, and as I've kind of said here, like, his dad owns the club. He's got him in. He's going to own the club one day. I think that's maybe the succession plan. He's just learning the role. He's learning all the jobs. But it was the way they went about calling him head of recruitment rather than head off. Suggests it's more important than what they're now trying to say it is in terms of the coordination, doesn't it? They could have called it recruitment coordinator or something, like, I don't know, manager of scouts. I don't know, whatever it is. Like, but to call him head off, it just gave the wrong perception off. And then especially by deleting it off the website, that got a lot of people suspicious. But I think from Ron Gordon's point of view, back to that, I think he is doing a good job. He has turned it around. Do you know, Graham? We had sponsorship boards round the sides of the pitch that people weren't paying for, like under the old ownership and all that. They were just people had paid their £1,000 5 years ago, and nobody had went back to them to say, "Do you want to keep that? Because that'll cost you X for another season." They were just there. They were just lying rotten at the side.
Gosh, that's crazy.
Absolutely mad, and that's how our revenues are going up so much, because we've actually got people in that are on top of all that now. And it's actually, we've even got some fans now moaning that we've got too many partnerships. It's like, why is that another partnership? Just sign another player instead. So, but I mean, I can't remember the percentages, but it's like double or something. Is that right, Matthew? I can't remember the numbers of the turnover and revenue coming in has massively increased over the last couple of seasons. So.
I think the Ian Gordon one's fun as well, because we never had a particularly great transfer window last summer, and then January never really addressed the issues that we had in the team. I think the knives were out already, so you have this kind of question mark about whether he's qualified or not to do the job. And then you look to see what is the evidence telling you with the signings that we've made. Do they back up that he's the right man for it? And at that point, there was probably question marks over it. However, I think the mood's probably changed a wee bit over the summer for the recent signings. John, how would you describe sort of the mood around the most recent signings?
I think the mood's excuse me. I think the mood's generally positive. Sorry about that. Yeah, generally positive, and I think that's obviously helped by the fact that some of the players are just very, very different from what we saw towards the end of last season. Pacey and physical, which is just the sort of antithesis, if you like, of what we saw before and what Graham was describing. Just the same old every week.
You're using loads of big words now. Is it just because Graham's?
I know. I'm just trying to impress him.
That's amazing. Amazing. Antithesis. It's never been said before on this podcast.
Not once. Graham, so we have Ron Gordon. He also has been involved with looking at this review of Scottish football. I think it's Deloitte that he brought in along with a couple of other chairmen. Did you have a view on that sort of work? And I think some people were a bit suspicious as to why he might be wanting to review all of Scottish football in that way. What were your thoughts on that?
For as long as I've been covering the game, there have been intermittent reviews of Scottish football, how to make it better. We every 3 or 4 or 5 years, and I'm scared to say this, but I've been covering Scottish football since 1990. Bizarrely, somebody sent me a copy yesterday of a Edinburgh Derby match report from 1989. Good God, 1989 in Scotland Sunday. Some of you guys who are old enough might remember it. It was the game when Andy Gorham was heroic for Hibs. They lost, but Gorham prevented it from being 7-0 to 2-0, or maybe not. But anyway, why did I say that? Yeah, so I've been around covering the game for 30 years. So if you think that there are every 3 or 4 years there's a dramatic need for a review of Scottish football, I've seen about 10 of these convulsions in my time. Somebody set up a review. Somebody commission get that review written about how we need to fix Scottish football, and this thing comes out. So I tend to be a bit jaundiced about it all. I tire of these reviews that never really come up with anything. The McLeish report, all these different reports. The famous Dutch coach 25, 30 years ago. They got the father of Dutch foot, Rinus Michels, the Rinus Michels report. He did one. The thing that always comes back to is not just league structure, but distribution of money and how Rangers Celtic unfairly hog all the money. And as much as I like socialism, there's something about they have the huge tribes supporting them, And I'm not convinced that the money that Rangers and Celtic fans pour into Rangers and Celtic should just be charitably chucked about all through the system. It doesn't seem quite right to me, that either, as much as I think there should be as much equality as possible. So I'm afraid, Matthew, I'm a bit jaundiced about reviews. I don't get excited by the words review of Scottish football.
I think
Maybe
the
I'm
last
a
two
dinosaur.
that I remember was when the SPL was introduced back in, was it 98? I think it was Alex Gold was maybe in charge at the time. Hibs got relegated.
Yes.
And then the one after that I remember was when when we had the 12-team league, top to 6, bottom 6 split. And it always seems to be about league restructuring, never about actually tackling fundamental flaws in the game.
Forgetting about the one that wasn't for personal gain at COVID, when we were going to go to a 13 or a 14-team league. Remember, that was the big push, and that just all went quiet. Like once Hearts got relegated, then they got promoted again, and they said, "No, we're fine with the 12-team league again." But it was really important last year that we go to 14. It's never been mentioned again.
You
playing it, aren't we?
You had Hearts with all the sporting integrity stuff and the COVID and the reconstruction, and then they go and chuck a team in the Lowland League and deprive one of the pyramid clubs for doing it. So I'm not sure they can be taken seriously. Graham, we've got Lee Johnson's now come on board at Hibs. What do you know of Lee Johnson, and what do you think he'll bring to the club?
I'm quite excited about it. I actually thought I do this old-fashioned thing of when a player or a manager comes to a club, a new player, a new manager, I do this old-fashioned thing of saying, right, let's look at the evidence here. What does the evidence say about this guy? And hang on a minute. No, sorry, my wee girl's shouting behind me. What does the evidence say? And I thought Lee Johnson was good at Barnsley and was good at Bristol. Can you be quiet there? I'm on a podcast here. Sorry about that.
It's usually my dog shouting in the background.
It's my wee lady was going to come in, and she likes to come in and blather to me. And I thought, I thought I looked at what he did at Barnsley, and it looked very good, and the Barnsley fans really liked him. And then he went to Bristol City, and he did well. He did well there. In fact, I think Bristol City were so chuffed with him they put him in a long-term contract. One of them, I think he went on a bad run. Was it at Bristol that he suddenly, as I said earlier, he suddenly just hit a Jack Ross-like sand trap. He just fell under, And then at Sunderland, did he not? He was going great guns at Sunderland. You could say that of the last 5 Sunderland managers. They all seem to be going great guns, but came up short. But he was doing very well at Sunderland. I think he won a trophy there. So I look at this guy's track record, and I think it looks good. I'm quite. If I were a Hibby, I'd be quite optimistic about this appointment.
What do you think he needs to do to the squad? Like, where do you think we're lacking?
Well, he needs to do what every manager needs to do, which is find an 18 to 20 to 22 goal a season number 9 or forward. And on the basis of what I saw from Sean Maloney, he needs to create a Hibs style of football which results in menace in the final third, menace in the penalty box. And I'm kind of hoping that Lee Johnson will prove to be one of these coaches that, yes, he respects protection of the ball, protect the ball, but above that, he wants end result in the penalty box, chances or goals. So it's style of play and just giving Hibs a much more clinical edge. I think that's
from your
what
perspective, Graham. Do you think the Hibs style of football is a real thing, or do you think it's a bit of a myth?
I like the kind of tradition of stylish football that you associate with Hibs, that is associated with Hibs. And to a certain extent, Celtic have got the same reputation. I mean, Celtic, the thing is, John, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? Because Celtic could play a lot of boring football under Brendan Rodgers, but they were phenomenally successful domestically. Brendan introduced this thing called recycling the play. My God, Celtic could go from the edge of the Hibs box at Celtic Park back to their own box in 5 seconds and start all over again. I mean, it could be tedious to watch, but they were very successful. A lot of Celtic fans thought that Martin O'Neill's brand of football was boring and slightly one-dimensional. They were phenomenally successful under Martin O'Neill. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, you can put an overemphasis on style of football. Style of football that doesn't win anything isn't worth its style, is it? You want to win. Do you want to win games or don't you? So that always has to be the number one currency. Winning football games, whether it's Route 1, whether it's total football, winning football games is what I think most fans want. In terms of my own connection to the Hibs tradition of stylish football, believe it or not, I'm not old enough to remember the famous 5, but I am old enough to remember the mythical early 70s Hibs team, which I remember I was in my granny's house in Hawick for the 7-0 game at Tynecastle, and I can remember in those days you got they must have been hurriedly patched together highlights, but you got them about 5:30 on what was called Sports Reel, not Sports Scene, Sports Reel, early evening on a Saturday. And I can remember watching this rout of Hearts and being mesmerised. But I was a Rangers fan as a kid, but my Hawick cousins were all Hibbies, and maybe that's partly why I do have this kind of affection for Hibs. And I also, my relationship to the so-called Hibs style of play is also linked to the brilliant League Cup win of 72 against Celtic at 2-0 or 2-1. 2-0? 2-1? Anyway, that the Hib. I've always said about that game between a brilliant Hibs team in 1972 and a brilliant Celtic team at Hampden could have been a game. If you look at it now, and I've looked at all of the 90 minutes, because I used to have a video of it, a DVD as they called it. No, they didn't call it a DVD, they called it a video. I used to have a VHS video, whatever the hell the terminology is. I had it, and I've watched the entire 90 minutes, and it was a game that could have been played in 2002. It was a game in its style and its precision and its skill. It could have been, it was 30 years ahead of its time. It could have been played in the early noughties. And I've spoke to Tony Higgins about this, and I've spoken to various people. Do you remember the Hibs Celtic League Cup final of 72? It was like a modern game of football, and no wonder with John Brownlee and Pat Stanton and Alec Edwards and Cropley and Alan Gordon and Jim O'Rourke. No wonder with these brilliant players. What I sometimes think Pat Stanton was such a brilliant footballer. What would he be worth today? I mean, when you look at the decline of Scottish football, this guy that had everything, physique and stamina and technique and skill. Anyway, I'm getting carried away here, but so the romantic part of me, yes, does want to acknowledge style of play and a team's tradition of style of play, so long as at the end of it all it's not a myth. There has to be success at the end of it, or else it's worthless.
Is there a particular game or story, Graham, that you covered for Hibs that jumps out to you?
Well, I'll tell you. Some of my Hibs memories go right back to my boyhood. Not just that game in grainy black and white on television, the absolute pumping that was doled out at Tynecastle. my dad, who was a Baptist minister here in Glasgow, was he loved football. And strangely, my dad was one of these guys who he didn't support a team. So he didn't have, I never remember my dad ever saying to me that he was a Rangers fan or a Celtic fan or a Clyde fan or anything like that. But he fell into that category of Scottish men who loved to go to the football. So I got dragged to every game. And I happened as a 8, 9, 10-year-old to see about 3 different Hibs appearances at Hampden. In fact, we were up in that old North Stand that was demolished in about the mid-70s. Hibs, I think, played in either 1 or 2 Drybrough Cup finals against Celtic. And I was at one of them, and they won one of them. I think they beat Celtic in a Drybrough Cup final. Maybe Celtic won one. And so I was at some of these, and bizarrely, I remember Johnny Hamilton playing for Hibs, who later moved to Rangers, bizarrely given a free by Hibs. I'm not sure why that happened, because he was such a good. So I remember my memories of Hibs go back to my childhood. I was also at these terrible 1979 Scottish Cup finals between Hibs and Rangers that went to 3 games.
Yes.
2 incredibly tedious 0-0 draws. 79.
And the dodgy Rangers
and I'm
penalty.
sorry to say, my other was it Paul?
Was it
Was it?
a dodgy Rangers
Are they
penalty?
not
Was
all
it not
dodgy?
to win it? Yeah.
There's nothing like the collective moral indignation of Hibs fans, is there? There's nothing. Especially when it happened only 40 years ago. I mean, but no, I think you might be right about that. In specific Hibs memories, when I started out at Scotland Sunday, I was the number 2 football writer to the late great Kevin McCara, who was the football correspondent at the Scotsman. So my medicine, my penance for being the number 2 writer was that in the big city derbies, I was allocated the Edinburgh Derby. So I had to sit in that splintery old press box at the back of Easter Road during that terrible time when Hibs had this monumentally terrible run against Hearts under Alec Miller. Now, I can't remember, was there not one time they won 1 in 23 derbies or something? Was it something like that?
22 where we couldn't beat them. Yeah, so 1 in 23.
Right.
Yeah.
God.
Grim.
So I was about 18 of them. And I do remember Joe Jordan, who I now got on really well with Joe Jordan, but I remember at one game, I decided after 10 minutes, this was a pile of shite, this football I'm watching. Terrible, grim. And I actually, after 15 minutes, I wrote the game off. It had the makings of another of these grim games. And I wrote this match report about how this game was like between 2 pub teams. The football was terrible. It was lumping, awful football. And I remember Joe Jordan, who was the Hearts manager at the time, was really irate with me and angry with me. So I remember some of these grim games. So I've got mixed memories of Hibs. I've got good memories from childhood, and I've got less good memories of Hibs as a working journalist. But I did cover, and I was at the extraordinary Ivan Sproul win at Ibrox, which was amazing. I mean, that is one of the most amazing matches under Tony Mowbray. One of the most amazing matches I've ever covered. And what always tickles me is when you see highlights of it. You see who was in that Hibs team. Scott Brown, I think, was in it. Kevin Thompson was in it. Some of these great players. And who do you see jumping on Ivan Sproul as he celebrates? The bold Mikey Stewart. I mean, he played that day, I think, with Hibs. You see Mikey and he's, red hair flopping all over Sproul, congratulating him. So that's a vivid Hibs memory.
Why do you think Alex Miller managed to survive as Hibs manager long as he did with that run that he had against Hearts? Because you said, I think at the start of the interview, that managers these days often, if they get a bad run of like 5 or 6 games, then quite often fans want them out. Alex Miller seems to be kind of unique, at least in that period. He'd been able to survive as long as he did.
Yes, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I remember Alex Miller being deeply unloved by many among the Hibs fans. It'd be totally wrong to generalise and say the Hibs fans didn't like him, because plenty of them would respect him. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. There was it was regarded as a grim period for Hibs. There were a couple of things, John, that happened. I do remember Alex Miller saying to me one time in his office, he had that kind of gaunt, Presbyterian kind of gauntness, didn't he, about him? He didn't have laughing eyes by any means, and I can remember him once saying to me that, you know what, the Hibs fans don't like me because of where I come from, because of where I played. I remember he said that to me. They don't like me because of my career, where I played. And I remember I was so young and naive at the time. I was thinking, what was he talking about? What? I didn't understand what he meant by that. But subsequently, I understood what he meant. So I think he would have his own theories for that. And also, I think he survived. It wasn't. I mean, he took Hibs into Europe, didn't he? I think they went into Europe under Alex Miller, and they had some good periods under him. Steve Archibald came under him. Certain good things happened, and also there was all that David Duff stuff going on in the background. I think he somehow I think Alex Miller behind the scenes, and you could argue this happened at Liverpool. I think Alex Miller, this is a terrible way to put it, but I think he knew how to work his ticket inside a football club. I think he did. And I hope he doesn't see this, because he'll think that's a terribly disparaging thing to say, a really disparaging thing to say. And I get accused of saying this all the time. People say to me, "Oh, Graham, you say you like everyone. You always say, well, I like him, and I like him, and I like him, and I like her." So maybe I'm a touch naive, but I've always gone well with Alex Miller. But I suspect he also knew how to work his ticket inside the structure of a football club.
So you mentioned Joe Jordan before, and then Alex Miller. I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast. But how do you deal with managers, players, other people that you maybe report on who you've said something critical about, and they come and pull you up on it?
Yeah, I've had a lot of instances like that. The worst ever, the most excruciating moment I ever had was. And I called it wrong. I just called this wrong. You won't be surprised to hear that. So in 2004, when Bertie Vogts was binned by Scotland, I was the chief sports writer of the Herald at the time. And the Herald, I mean, all the papers are in decline now, but the Herald at the time was still this west of Scotland, the Times of Scotland, as it was called. And so I suppose my position was fairly prominent. And Walter Smith was being rumoured that Walter Smith was going to be the next Scotland manager. And I wrote this huge piece in the Herald, which Walter Smith, I subsequently found out, read every day. I wrote this huge piece in the Herald thing. Oh, God, not the Walter and Archie show. I mean, please, not the Walter and Archie knock show for Scotland. We've moved on from this. Surely we've moved on to something more broad-minded, or look abroad, or do something else. And I wrote this fulminating piece saying, please God, not more of this tedium. And at 10 o'clock the day it was published, the SFA phoned around the journalists and said, at the last minute, said 10 a.m. that morning, Walter will meet you all at 11:30 at Hampden. Graham, you're invited. Hugh Keevans, you're invited. I thought, oh shit. Oh God, I've just written this deeply offensive piece about him, and it felt like somebody inviting you into their house for dinner when you've just graffitied their front gate or something. I thought, oh God. And to his great credit, Walter greeted me that morning with nothing but civility. He gave me a kind of dry smile when I came in.
He never mentioned.
He never mentioned it, except in one little cryptic comment in the course of our half-hour discussion, when there was 8 of us around the manager's table in Hampden, and he said, I might not be to everybody's approval, and he turned and he kind of gave me a smile. He actually gave me a kind of fatherly, kind of compassionate smile. I might not be to everybody's approval, but and he looked over at me, and I've often thought about this because Walter Smith was nothing but gracious to me, and I've had a terrible relationship with Rangers. I mean, I've had editorial rammies with Rangers all the way down the line because of bigotry and other things that I think were really wrong about the club. So editorially, I've had a terrible relationship with Rangers, the club that I loved as a kid. But strangely, I've always got on really well with all the Rangers managers. I got on brilliantly with Big Eck. I got on like a house on fire with Dick Advocat. Paul Le Guen I got on well with. When Walter came back, Alan McCoist, I've got on really well with all these managers. And Walter in particular was really warm to me throughout his career. He would always meet me for a coffee. If I wanted to help with something, I had to do a huge obituary on Jim McLean. And I phoned up Walter and he spent 2 hours with me giving me all sorts of background stuff on Jim McLean. So, but that's my worst memory of writing a castigating piece. And then, you know, and when I interviewed Martin O'Neill last year, I got on well with Martin, but Celtic had a 3 or 4 week wobble under Martin, and I wrote a piece, a very critical piece about the way Martin was setting Celtic up at the time. And I went into I tottered into Parkhead the next day, being prepared to the music. And Martin had it out with me in private, not in front of the guys, but gave me this kind of stentorian, Graham, will you stay behind? Could you stay behind at the end? I want to, you know, jabbing his finger at me. And I thought, right, okay, he wants to have a word with me. So, and Joe Jordan I had a ferocious bust up with in his office, but I was younger then. I don't know why Joe was, well, I do know why. I was going to say, when I had a row with Joe in 1990 or 91, I was of no consequence whatsoever. I had no profile. I was a new young kid in the block. Why was this guy bothering with somebody like me that he'd never heard of, writing about him? But the answer to that was because he was really insecure in his job. He'd just arrived. And a lot of managers are like that when they come in. Big Joe, I now realise, was insecure in his job. He was threatening me with legal action and stuff like that. And I've mentioned it to Joe since, and we laugh about it. But I remember that. So bizarrely, the one guy I thought I would have a huge bust up with, and I was shaking going in to see him after still not that long in the job, was Jim McLean at Dundee United. Mm-hmm. Now, Jim McLean would headbutt people if he didn't like them. He headbutted that STV cameraman one time at Airport, and we know what happened to John. We know what happened to poor old Digger Barnes. I mean, Jim didn't hold back, but my goodness, it was really strange. Jim McLean and I were opposites in many ways, but we shared a similar puritanical Protestant background, real Puritanism, no alcohol, no smoking, no swearing, no sex, no everything except reading the Bible. That was all. We shared that same puritanical background, and Jim strangely liked me and related to me, and kind of respected me. So I thought the one guy I got on really well with was the guy I thought I wouldn't go on well with, and that was Jim McLean.
Are there any? Sorry,
I was going to ask just on that sort of topic of working with people. Am I right in saying that the succulent lamb terminology phrase, that's actually your words that you created? You wrote
God.
that.
Oh,
is that right?
Oh, not this succulent lamb. Oh, how do I ever escape succulent lamb?
I don't, because you just get hammered by it all the time, don't you? But I thought it was your words.
Yeah, I invented the joke. So, succulent lamb, and I'll tell you as briefly as I can, because some people might be bored with this. Succulent lamb means grovelling to Rangers, sooking up to Rangers. And I invented the joke, just pre-internet, I invented the joke, succulent lamb journalism means sooking up to Rangers. And to this day, young Celtic fans who are aged 24, 25, 26, they tweet me and say, Graham, let me explain Succulent Lamb to you. I'll explain it. You know, and I say, oh, for God's sake, you're the last kid that needs to explain Succulent Lamb to me. So what happened was, before he wanted me lined up and shot, I got on very well with David Murray in the 90s. I got on very well with him. And then I got on very, very badly with him. But during the time I got on very well with him, he celebrated 10 years in charge of Rangers, 88 to 98. And I said to Scotland Sunday, I think I should do a big piece on David Murray, 10 years at Rangers. And they said, yeah, okay. So I phoned David, and I was meant to go through to Edinburgh to interview him for the big all singing, all dancing 10 years at Rangers, and he couldn't do it. And then he was going to come through to Glasgow, and I was going to meet him in Glasgow, and then that was cancelled. And we went back and forth, and we weren't getting anywhere. And eventually David said to me, look, Graham, I'm going out to Jersey in 2 days' time, and I'm going for 4 days. He had a holiday pad in Jersey. I'm going out to Jersey. Why don't you fly out and we'll do it then? I said, yep, okay. Back then, money was no object. I said to Scotland Sunday, by the way, that David Murray thing, I'm flying out to Jersey. Could somebody sort me out a flight or show me what to do? And fine. So that was all arranged. So I was flying out to Jersey on the Wednesday morning, and I was coming back on Friday night with my big David Murray interview celebrating 10 years. Late on the Tuesday night, Jim Traynor phoned me and said, I'm coming to Jersey as well. And I said, what? And Jim said, I know you're going out to interview David Murray for Scotland Sunday. David has said, maybe I could come out and do it for the Daily Record, and you could do it for your paper. So we have a broadsheet Sunday, and we have a tabloid daily. And I said, all right, then, whatever you want. So Jim and I flew out together on this mad trip. From recollection, he stayed a day and then he left. I stayed 2 days and then I left, and we both did our separate sit-down interviews with David Murray. And Jim Traynor used to be incredibly sooky to David Murray. I mean, I've never seen or read more groveling journalism than Jim covering David Murray for the Record. But I know why, because the back page was really, really important to Jim and the Daily Record. So Murray was the hand that fed him. So if Jim kept him sweet and went on about how great he was, he'd get a whole constant drip of back page stories. So I know why he was sycophantic in that way. And in the course of the piece that Jim wrote on the Friday before my piece on the Sunday, me and Jim Traynor and David Murray had gone out for dinner on the Thursday night, and we had lamb. We all had lamb. And Jim in the Daily Record wrote, this typical of David Murray. The most succulent lamb you could ever slice your knife through out in dinner with David Murray. And I thought, here he goes again. It's David Murray's. Now he's talking about his succulent lamb. So I wrote this joke in my sports diary on the Sunday about, I now have a new way of describing groveling Rangers journalism. It's called succulent lamb journalism. And I described it and I defined it and I made a joke about it. And that story in my column, taking the piss out of Jim and the phrase succulent lamb, disappeared for about a year. But then the internet and message boards came on the scene and it reappeared. And for some really weird reason, the phrase gathered momentum and it appeared everywhere. It spread like wildfire until succulent lamb entered the kind of popular vernacular of football. So it was a combination of me inventing it and Jim Traynor inventing it, and that's the origin of the phrase succulent lamb. I've always loved the phrase since then, and Jim Traynor has always hated it because somebody would say, well, where does that come from, Jim? And he's always got to disappear.
I can't imagine Jim Traynor being angry at him. That's us almost out of time. So just before we wrap up, what are your sort of predictions for the season ahead? So in general and for Hibs?
I can see Hibs going down.
Great.
No, I love you know, what was it they used to say in Captain Blackadder? There's nothing worse than blind, ludicrous optimism or something. I mean, I think Hibs. I think Hibs, and I hope Hibs are onto something with Lee Johnson. And I'm really looking forward to seeing them. I think Hibs will be a stick on under Lee Johnson for top 4, top 3. So I'll come back when they're floundering in 3 months' time. I'll come back on here and talk to you guys. I just feel optimistic about it. I like quick, just for 10 seconds. Quick trick question: Lee Johnson's dad managed one national team. Which one? No Wikipedia.
Latvia.
Oh, well done, man. That was easier than I thought it would be. Yeah, Latvia. Yeah. I met Gary Johnson in I met Gary. Yeah, I met Gary Johnson in 2001. We were in. Do you remember a time? Every Euro Championship, World Cup qualifier, there was a time Latvia and Scotland were in the same group. We were going over there all the time, and I remember meeting this guy Gary Johnson, the coach of an Englishman, coach of Latvia, and I was intrigued by it. And Lee's dad.
I only know that because it was in an interview with Lee Johnson recently, and he was talking about it. So something must have. It's not often I remember things, but I remembered that.
I was really surprised to see you remembering him.
I'm full of these. I'm full of these riveting facts.
I'm not. I wish I was. Graham, just to remind us, where can people find your podcast?
Okay, it's called Pressbox. It's a Patreon site, Scottish football podcast called Pressbox. If anyone Googles Graham Spiers and Pressbox, they'll find it. And it's £1.99 a month for about 9 podcasts per month, either interviews or Scottish football debates. So yeah, thanks for allowing me to plug it, and thanks very much for having me on here. It's been great fun.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Graham,
for coming on. If you want to listen to some more, you can subscribe to our podcast at longbangers.hubwave.net. We'll be back with Longbangers Extra Time shortly after this podcast, and then we'll be back with Short Bangers next Thursday, so get your questions in for that. In the meantime, Graham, thanks again for your time tonight. Colin, John, thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Well, they trailed me down when I broke free. I drank all the whiskey in Tennessee. I don't drink water, no.